The red and blue lights flash in your rearview mirror. For a split second, you wonder if they're meant for someone else. Then the siren chirps once, sharp and unmistakable. Your hands tighten on the steering wheel. You glance at your speed, your mirrors, the empty seat beside you. You signal, pull over, and suddenly everything feels slower, heavier. The officer steps out of the cruiser. You can't hear what they're saying yet, but you already feel like you're being evaluated. You roll the window down. Your heartbeat is louder than the engine. Do you know why I pulled you over? And just like that, the moment begins. Have you ever been in a traffic stop where something felt off, like the officer was trying to get you to say something, admit something, or react in a certain way? If you have, I want you to share that experience in the comments, because what most drivers don't realize is that some of those moments are not accidental. There's a reason they feel uncomfortable, and there's something important behind it that I'm going to break down as we go. Because here's the reality that surprises people the first time they hear it clearly. Police officers in the United States are legally allowed to lie to you during certain interactions. That doesn't mean every officer does it recklessly. It doesn't mean every stop is manipulative. But it does mean that during an investigation, yes, even a routine traffic stop, there are situations where deception is considered a lawful tool. And once you understand that, a lot of those strange roadside moments start to make sense. You start to see patterns. You start to realize why certain questions are repeated, why the tone changes, why silence makes them uncomfortable, why they sometimes seem so certain, even when they don't actually know anything yet. Let's walk through this the way it really happens on the road, not the way people imagine it. You're pulled over. The officer approaches your window. Maybe they're calm, maybe they're a little stern. The first few questions feel routine. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Is this your vehicle? Now here's what most drivers think. These are just casual questions. They're not. Every one of those questions has a purpose. Not necessarily to catch you doing something illegal, but to observe how you respond, your tone, your eye contact, your hesitation. Are your answers immediate or do you pause? Do your answers stay consistent if the same question is asked again in a slightly different way? Because that's the first thing officers are trained to do, establish a baseline of your behavior. And this is where the first common lie comes into play. An officer might say something like, "I already know what's going on here. I just need you to be honest with me." That sounds authoritative. It sounds like they have information you don't know about. But here's the truth. Sometimes they don't. That statement is often a tactic to get you to fill in the blanks. Think about it. If someone says they already know, what's your instinct? You start explaining. You start talking more than you planned to. You might even guess what they know and accidentally give them new information. That's the trap. And it works more often than people think, especially under pressure. Now imagine this situation. You're nervous. You weren't doing anything serious, maybe just driving a little fast. Maybe you rolled through a stop sign earlier. The officer asks again, "Are you sure that's all?" There's a pause. You start second-guessing yourself. Should you mention that thing from earlier? Should you clarify? And before you realize it, you've gone from answering a simple question to volunteering extra details that weren't even being asked for. That's how small situations grow, not because of what you did, but because of how the conversation unfolds. Another moment that catches drivers off guard is when an officer says something like, "If you cooperate, this will go easier for you." Now let's be very clear here. Cooperation in terms of providing your license, registration, and following lawful instructions, that's required. But when it comes to answering investigative questions, cooperate often means talk more. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Talking more doesn't always help you. In fact, it can do the opposite. Officers are not there to build your defense. They're there to gather information. And sometimes the more relaxed and cooperative you try to appear, the more you unintentionally give them material to work with. This is where many drivers misunderstand their rights. You can be respectful, calm, and compliant without answering every question. But that balance is harder than it sounds when someone in authority is standing at your window, watching your every move. Now let's talk about another scenario that feels very real for a lot of people. The officer takes your license and registration. They walk back to their vehicle. You sit there. 1 minute passes, then 2, then 5. You start wondering what's happening. Are they checking something? Writing a ticket? Calling something in? Then they come back and the tone has shifted slightly. Have you had anything to drink tonight? Even if you haven't, that question changes the energy immediately. And sometimes the officer might say something like, "I can smell alcohol." This is one of those moments where people panic, because now it feels like there's evidence, even if there isn't. But here's what many drivers don't realize. Statements like that can sometimes be used as a probing tactic. It puts pressure on you to respond defensively. "I only had 1 drink. I had something hours ago. I'm completely fine." And just like that, you've confirmed something that didn't need to be confirmed. That's how psychological pressure works during stops. It's subtle. It builds gradually. Now let's step into another common situation. The officer asks you to step out of the vehicle. A lot of people feel like this is optional. It's not. In most situations, officers are legally allowed to ask drivers, and even passengers, to step out of the vehicle during a lawful stop. But here's where things get interesting. Once you're out of the car, the dynamic changes completely. You're more exposed, more visible, more aware of your surroundings, and the officer might start asking questions again. "Is there anything illegal in the vehicle? You don't mind if I take a quick look, right?" This is one of the most misunderstood moments in any traffic stop, because now you're being asked for consent, and the way it's phrased often sounds casual, almost friendly. "You don't mind, do you?" That's not a command, that's a request. But the pressure is real. The tone makes it feel like saying no is suspicious. And sometimes officers might add something like, "If there's nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem." That's another example of a statement that sounds logical, but is actually designed to influence your decision. Because here's the reality. You are allowed to refuse consent to a search. Politely, calmly, without escalating the situation. But many drivers don't know that, or they feel too uncomfortable to assert it in the moment. So they agree. And once that search begins, everything changes. Now let's talk about something that people rarely think about. Silence. You've probably heard the phrase, "You have the right to remain silent." But in real life, silence feels awkward. It feels tense. If an officer asks a question and you don't answer, there's a pause. Maybe a second question follows. Maybe the tone shifts slightly. Is there a reason you're not answering? That moment is difficult, because staying silent requires confidence under pressure, and officers know that. In some cases, they might continue asking questions, rephrasing them, trying different angles, not necessarily because they expect a different answer, but because they're testing your consistency and your comfort level. This is where many people break, not because they're guilty, but because the silence becomes uncomfortable. And once they start talking again, they often say more than they intended. Another situation that catches drivers off guard is when officers speak to passengers separately. You might be sitting there, watching through the mirror, wondering what's being said. Then the officer comes back and says something like, "Your passenger told me a different story." Now you're confused. Did they really say something different? Is there a misunderstanding? Should you explain? That's another psychological tactic that can be used in certain situations to create doubt and encourage you to clarify or correct something. And again, the more you talk, the more information is being gathered. Not all of it helps you. Now let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. None of this means that every officer is trying to manipulate you. That's not the point. The point is that traffic stops are not just about traffic violations. They're about observation. They're about behavior. They're about gathering information quickly, often in unpredictable situations. And from the officer's perspective, they don't know who you are when they approach that vehicle. They're reading everything: your hands, your movements, your tone, your answers. and at the same time you're trying to figure out what they're thinking. That tension is what makes these interactions feel so intense. Now here's where drivers make one of the biggest mistakes. They assume that being friendly and talkative will make the situation easier. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it creates more opportunities for misunderstanding, because friendliness can turn into over-explaining. Over-explaining can turn into inconsistencies, and inconsistencies can raise suspicion, even when there's nothing serious going on. So what's the balance? Calm, respectful, controlled. Answer what you're legally required to answer. Provide your documents. Follow lawful instructions. But don't feel pressured to fill silence with unnecessary details. And most importantly, understand that not every statement made during a stop is a neutral one. Some are strategic. Some are designed to test you. Some are meant to see how you react under pressure. And once you recognize that, you start to approach these situations differently. You don't panic as quickly. You don't rush to explain everything. You don't assume that silence means guilt. You become more aware. Because at the end of the day, a traffic stop is not just about what happened before the lights came on. It's about everything that happens after. The pauses, the questions, the tone shifts, the decisions you make in those few minutes on the side of the road. And once you've been through enough of them, or once you start really understanding how they work, you begin to notice something subtle but important. The moment where the conversation could go one way or another, and how easily that direction can change, depending on just a few words.